the Alexander technique, and what were I caught you?
So what is the Alexander technique? The Alexander technique is a way of noticing how you respond to stimuli and to let go of those responses that do not serve you. So, for instance, most of us react to the stimuli of stress and strain and being attacked by pulling down and in. We kind of compress ourselves and contort ourselves and make ourselves smaller with the probably subconscious desire that if we only make ourselves smaller, the world won't hurt us as much. But unfortunately, even if we make ourselves very small and very tight and kind of curl into a ball, other people are just as likely to hurt us. So the Alexander technique is a way of noticing how we're responding to the stimuli of life and to let go of those responses that are unnecessary compression, unnecessary tension, and unnecessary kind of pulling down and in on ourselves.
That's amazing. I often said to my daughter when she is on a horse, she rides horses, I'll look at her and I'll say, drop it. And that means drop your shoulders, because she'll get nervous when she's beginning to ride in a competition. Her shoulders will inadvertently just go up, and she'll just get real, she'll kind of suck in. In the horse world, we call that actually sucking in. And when you're trying to put a saddle on a horse, you have to wait to cinch them when they breathe out, when they relax, because they're so nervous about this contraption being put on their back, which I actually started a ground roots movement locally about people cinching horses, and it's a complete other show. But I agree with what you just said, and I do believe that it is. I've never heard it quite put that way, but now that I hear you say that, you're right. We just sort of suck in and just sort of try to disappear. That's very interesting. I've never heard it put that way.
Yeah, so what you were describing with your daughter, it sounds like the fight or flight reflex. So when we're frightened, what happens is that the head tends to jut forward, the shoulders tend to rise up, the head tends to rotate backwards onto the spine, kind of compressing the spine and the whole torso, and that's the fight or flight reflex. And that's a great place to fight out of, and it's a great place to flee out of. But when you're riding a horse or doing most of life, it's really a lousy position. It doesn't help you at all. It hurts you. And what happens to many people as they get older, they get stuck in some version of that. So they're walking around all the time with their head jutted way forward from their torso, with their shoulders riding high, and they're just like a powder keg waiting to go off because they're stuck in fight or flight. So they're either going to fight back against a stimuli, or they're going to kind of flee from it. But they're going to be contorted and quite unpleasant to be around, because their whole musculature is strained and stressed and deformed. So somebody who is poised in the way they move and in the way they speak is much more likely to be poised in the way they relate to you and to themselves. But on the other hand, someone who's strained and stressed and contorted and distorted in the way they hold themselves and the way they move and the way they speak, they're likely to be really strained and stressed in the way they relate to themselves and to other people. So these things all kind of run together, the body, the mind, and the emotions. They all interconnected.
Okay, so maybe you're thinking that once we become, first of all and foremost, aware that this is going on, then what is your answer? What is the Alexander? I mean, you explained what it is, but what is it? Get more specifically, what is it? I mean, I know that you teach it. Is that correct?
Yes.
What is your website?
Alexander90210.com, because I'm based in Beverly Hills. So Alexander90210.com. So it is possible for some people to kind of just learn it on their own. There are abundant resources online for kind of teaching yourself the Alexander technique. But most people need a teacher who will kind of help point out to them how they're reacting to the stimuli as they speaking. Like public speaking or speaking on the radio is a big stimuli, and many people react to that stimuli by kind of tilting their head back, compressing their neck, and then they find themselves gasping for breath and getting hoarse and kind of losing their voice, and they're wondering what's going on. So one way that a person can take a look at how he's responding to stimuli is by videotaping himself. Like videotape yourself when you're speaking on the radio, or when you're just getting in and out of a chair, or working in the kitchen, and kind of look and see what are your habits, what's going on, and under what circumstances does your head-neck back relationship get all distorted, and when do these weird tension patterns come out. And then instead of building upon where you're at with all these exercises, like most transformational systems, they just kind of give you exercises to change yourself. The Alexander technique is a process of subtraction. You notice the things that you're doing to interfere with yourself, and then you slowly, to the best of your ability, let them go. So you slowly start taking away these unnecessary tension patterns that you've adopted to get through life, because life is tough. And the way that most of us get through tough times is by kind of pulling down and in and going, okay, I just got to get through this. And you kind of contort yourself and, okay, I just got to break through this obstacle that I'm facing right now. And that takes a toll. And what happens is that we kind of add one weird tension pattern after another, so that, as we age, we steadily become increasingly deformed.
Wow, that's very, very interesting that you say that. I want people to know that one thing I used to tell my children when they were getting ready to go to a school event, a social event where they were nervous, I said, I want you to remember one thing. When you're worried that everybody in this room is looking at you and talking about what you've got on, that everybody else in this room is worrying about the same thing. Everybody feels the same way. Some people deal with it better than others. Some people have it to where they don't even show it anymore. But it's an everything. It's an everybody thing. Everybody is, like you said, stays relatively somewhat in fight or flight. Now, my explanation of the fight or flight syndrome may differ a little bit from yours in that when I developed back in the 90s panic disorder, I had a panic attack and blah, 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 blah. It turned into, I almost became agoraphobic. And agoraphobic, is that the right word? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
I'm sort of the goofy, funny. We have a lot of fun on the show. We laugh, and I'm sort of just eclectic in a lot of ways. But it's actually, would you not agree? It's actually a defense mechanism, fight or flight, because it was invented, so to speak. It was put in our bodies for survival, which means the pupils will dilate so that we can see better at night. Our breathing shifts to the upper two lobes of our lungs so that we can get oxygen quicker to run. Our muscles, we begin to sweat to cool the body off, and it's to run from a bear in the woods. But what happens in our lives now, we're doing it, but there's no bear.
Exactly.
And so who was Alexander? I want to get more into the Alexander technique. I want to know who he is or who she is, and what is the basis of the technique. I mean, I know you said making yourself aware.
So F.M. Alexander, Frederick Matthias Alexander, was an Australian actor, and in the late 1880s, early 1890s, in Sydney, Australia, and Melbourne, Australia, he was an actor, and he'd performed for very rowdy tin miners. They didn't have public address systems back then, so he'd strain to try to project his voice to fill the room. And as he strained, he started losing his voice, and so his whole career as an actor was threatened because he repeatedly lost his voice, and nobody was able to tell him what was wrong. So he finally sat himself down in a room filled with mirrors and kind of looked at what he was doing when he was trying to project his voice, and he saw that he was tilting his head back and compressing his neck and kind of tightening his whole body as he was straining to project his voice. And all of that made it more difficult to project his voice. And he was gasping for breath, and he was rapidly losing his voice. So he tried to stop doing that. He tried to stop tipping his head back and tightening his neck and tightening his whole body. And he was shocked to find that he could not stop. So he eventually developed this system, which we now know as the Alexander technique, which involves, first of all, noticing what your patterns of unnecessary tension are, and then inhibiting those patterns. So inhibition in this sense is a neuromuscular term. It's not, psychological shame term. We're just talking about not doing the things that hurt you. And then he found that by thinking his directions of directing his head forward and up, through his thinking and thinking about the width of his back and the length of his back and thinking of these directions of expansion instead of contraction. He was